Talking about business practices and this specifically, like, why does this even fit into that conversation? But it's really about inner authority and how Reiki empowers that within us. And if we think about all these moments in our ages, it would very much be, that at where was our inner authority in those ages, and how did that fit, and where are we today with it, and how does that apply to your Reiki practices and all of that. So it's just interesting to listen to you guys talk and how the conversation actually really is relevant to what we're talking about. And this actually came from us talking about Reiki rules. Who made them? And do you have to follow them? And so a lot of this comes up in Reiki classes when we're teaching, and in our own understanding of our Reiki practices, how it works for each of us. And for me, when I think of Reiki practices, we all have Reiki practices, but we don't all have Reiki businesses. But the concepts still apply to both. And so with this particular topic about the rules around Reiki and the transformation of this topic, say, from when I learned Reiki in 2000. And at that time, there was still a lot of the outer authority and Reiki rules. And what I would call, well, some people would call it ritual, and some people would call it tradition and, ceremony and certain ways that you do things. One of the things that happened for me with a lot of those rules and traditions and ways of practice is that they were taught in a way, not by my teacher. I would say it was like more of a collective belief around Reiki than my specific teacher, of my first Reiki teacher. But a lot of the ways that it was taught was that there were specific, correct ways to do Reiki, specific, correct ways to believe about Reiki. Your Reiki practices had to be done this way, which all is great. That's the tradition, that's the commonality of practices, of, having techniques that we use. But what was attached to that was that if I didn't do it those ways, I was doing it wrong. So for me, what I know now that I didn't know then is that having been raised in I was born in 1957. So the 60s and 70s in San Diego, and those were my biggest influences, as my younger years, but really aware from the perspective of today that those of us in that generation were absolutely born into the authority of the outside authority. And so specific ways to do things, specific ways to believe. And that's part of cultural development and societal development and things like that. So I don't even mean it for it to be a criticism of it all. I am certain many, many reasons that that's how society and culture was working. But I do believe that a lot of that is what we called the age of Pisces, and then moving into the age of Aquarius. And what is that difference? And we are at the beginning of it. And Reiki to me is such a perfect example of it, because the Reiki energy, as we work with it today, we are very aware that it is about accessing our own inner truth and our own inner authority. And that transition from the outside authority to the inner authority. Knowing about myself now, what I know is that's what I was always looking for. So I was raised Catholic. I loved being Catholic as a child. I loved my relationships with Jesus and Mary and the saints and the angels. And, for me, it was very, very much present as a spiritual child, very present in the spirituality of it. And then, of course, began to question authority as a teenager, and particularly in those times of being a teenager in the 60s and 70s, et cetera, and all the cultural things going on at that time with outside authority. So looking always for a pathway that didn't have the one right way and didn't have judgment, but not knowing how to find that because it wasn't readily available. And that's when I was introduced to my first soul retrieval and my shamanic training with my teacher, Jan Inglesmith. And it was the first time, and I was Robin's age, 40, 39, 40. And it was the first time that something was teaching me how to go inside and find me. Then I received Reiki attunements 3 years after my shamanic, when I started in my shamanic journey and training. And that's when Reiki came in, and it was like, boom, this is the energy. This is what you remember and know inside. And now what I know about it is so engaged in teaching us how to access our inner authority, our own inner truth. We have a collective, we have community, we have commonalities of practices. We know things work certain ways, and we talk about them and we share our ideas about them. But even if we have the same idea about some of the Reiki practices or beliefs or ways that it resonates for you, the way it defines for you, how you understand it, and most of all, how you understand yourself with the Reiki energy, because that's what it's doing, is highlighting that. So the Reiki energy, I believe, came in at this time in human history directly for this transformation of the age, from the outside authority to the inner authority. How do we find our inner truth, stay community, stay collected and connected and in communion with the earth, unifying with the earth, unifying with self, unifying with God, each in our own independent way, but also having the ability to do that together. So how that has applied to what we're talking about today is that as a teacher, and we teach a lot of people, we have a lot of community, we are Reiki practitioners, we live Reiki ourselves, just as our everyday life and lifestyle. The Reiki energy taking us to our inner truth and then questioning the rules that we were taught. And I hear a lot of rules that people are taught. And so we wanted to talk about them because they do apply both to your Reiki practices and then if you have a Reiki business. And a lot of times people are unsure about them. So recognizing that Reiki is taking us to our inner truths and our own inner authority, so we can go within and listen within for what's true for us. That goes along with our other belief systems. If you have religious practices, it will engage you deeper into the spirituality of your religious practices. If you have a scientific view, It's going to take you deeper into the, the frequencies of the earth and the biofields and, the energies and the elemental parts of the earth. So there's so many ways for us to resonate with it. But for me, for a long time, because I was really brought up with Reiki originally until I studied with William 3 years later, with a lot of rules around Reiki. And those lasted for a long time as the evidence-based history of Reiki was revealed. And that continues to keep happening. Like every day, something new is coming in right now about the history of Reiki, as more Reiki people in Japan are being discovered that have been practicing, throughout the last 100 years. But also the understanding that Reiki has always evolved according to the needs of the people and what would be the inner truth at that time and the inner authority at that time. So that's still true today for each of you. And so as an early practitioner of the rules and questioning, because I've always been that kind, I've always questioning authority all through childhood and everything. And so always questioning it and questioning it within myself and what is mine, that was a deep dive in itself, continues to be a deep dive in itself. But, going from the culturally created part of the authority to the truth of my own inner authority. So back to the Reiki rules, I keep kind of trailing off. But back to the Reiki rules, there were so many that I learned originally. And those were things such as, the hand positions were absolute, that we placed them in very specific ways, in a very specific order, and we left our hands in that position for 3 minutes. And we didn't vary from that. And I was even in Reiki circles where if you didn't have your hands exactly right, there was a person who was observing and they would come around and correct you. Like put your hands, and it felt different than a teaching. It felt like a correction. So really big difference, to me, like I'm totally open to the teaching. Like, oh, hey, try it this way, but no, you're doing it wrong. Put it here, was a different energy around it. There were also a lot of myths that were taught back then. So things such as, never do Reiki on a broken bone or it will set improperly. Never do Reiki on a pregnant woman or during labor or during surgery or with a person who has diabetes, or don't do it with a pacemaker. That one, I will tell you what, because I was in the time when those things were like, this is how this is the truth. This is the way it is. And so when I found out that they were myths and that, there was no basis for those myths or those rules and no basis in history for them or evidence of them. And then the first time I did Reiki on a person with a pacemaker, oh my gosh, the whole time I was just like, please let this be a myth. Please let this be a myth. So, really having to go into the energy of it. So here's the way that we can talk about maybe not just what are the rules, who wrote them, and who do I follow, but how you use your own discernment about them. So some of that discernment is going to come from your own practices and the results of your practices. Some of it is going to be intuitive. Some of it you authentically might hear from somebody else and think, yeah, that makes sense. I think I'm going to do it that way. that's how that works, and I believe that, or I resonate with a certain idea or way of thinking about it or way of practicing. And then some of it is practicality, and some of it is intuition. And I'll tell you, when I first discovered that, that some of the rules I had learned did not have a historical basis, there was no evidence for them, was at the same time I was trying to learn about that all the way around, like in my life. So I had read a book by Neil Donald Walsh called Conversations with God, and he did a teaching in it that resonated with me about all thoughts lead to two things. One is that it leads to love, and the other is that the thought might lead to fear. And that if the thought leads to love, God is love. Anything not of love is not of God. And then if it leads to fear, it's most likely human made. So that was the filter that I started listening with. And I would use Reiki to activate that filter. So I was listening for what was true and how to get to my truth, let go of some of the fear that I had of my own inner truth, because there's fear that goes with following your own inner truth, or can be, and doing it anyway. So I had to use Reiki to help me kind of move through those. So, difficulty in trusting myself, overcoming my own skepticism, some of my conflicts with my existing beliefs. I would say that was a really big one. And now what has happened is that some of my beliefs that I had at that time from being raised Catholic, I set those aside, but now I have some of those relationships back through my own inner truth. And it's not from what someone else told me to believe. And, now I have my own relationships and ways that it all works for me, and used Reiki for that. So that one was a really big one. And I would say that's our culturally created self too, not just necessarily spiritual, but that, what do we believe? And actually, Joe, this brings it back to you talking about the Easter Bunny and your existing beliefs in that amount. So then really even understanding what my authority was, and based on kind of an imbalance of what I believed authority was anyway, from like my culturally created self. And then worried about my own ego. Like, well, wait a minute, who am I to have my own inner truth? Like, how does that work? So a lot of those things were things that I had to overcome. I also had conflict in my life for following my own inner truth, putting it out there publicly. There goes to how some of this was coming up about business discussions. That one of the things we hear a lot of times is people are challenged by speaking their truth with their inner authority and being public with their Reiki practices. And that one was a big one. And I did run into conflict. We did. Robin and I did. She grew up with it with us. And, it was part of her childhood, was some of the conflict around it. So then also, how do you find it? What do you know about your accuracy? How do you get to trust your accuracy? And so for me, that took time. It's been a whole journey of discovery, but I really believe that this is what Reiki energy is specifically teaching us and taking us into this next age of inner authority, freedom of thought, independence, collective humanity, humanitarianism. And so unity is another big communion. These are all aspects of this inner truth, inner authority, as we get to have direct connection in our world around us, direct connection with each other, and also our own ability to discover what's true. I'll tell you, it's just popping into my head right now. With all these advances in technology, we are really going to have to deep dive into what is true and not just believing everything that's out there. So inner truth is going to be very necessary. And skepticism, I think, is actually healthy. I tell people when they talk about being skeptical about Reiki, I'm like, yeah, you should be discerning and you should be questioning and you should ask things and look at it and observe it and, listen for results. But I'll tell you what, spiritual autonomy, however that looks for you, whatever that means for you, what is deep inside of you, whatever you call that, having your own autonomy, your own sovereignty. And as we are this bridge generations time frame of this movement from the outer authority into the inner authority, that's what we can do, is just be empowered, stay stable with it, question, grow, be community, also be independent. Use Reiki to help you assess your own inner guidance, and also listening to external knowledge too. So I don't say it in a way that like I only listen to my inner truth. I listen to all different sources and listen to find out different things, mainly because I'm really curious and I love to find out all different points of view and things like that. But then taking it to that place of what's true. And for me, the assessment of, does it lead to love? Does it lead to fear? And so then let's say it did lead to fear. Be like, okay, well, I better assess that. Is that valid? Should I be? Fear is useful. Like it can be helpful to say, yeah, I need to be paying attention to this. But also, when it is in your own spiritual autonomy, that you get to listen to you get to have your own direct connections. So anyway, again, it's interesting to us that it's coming around this way, since we specifically started the month to talk about business practices and why this came in, because last week it was deep diving us into connecting to your greatness. And so then this one, and how this all applies to forward motion and business practices, if that is you, also including those who do not have businesses, and for your own personal practices, but also for those of you that do have practices, that we want to go into another journey today to release the areas of authority that are not yours and not useful to you, and to bring in that area of your own inner authority that is your truth, and to really empower that and help that express as you move forward. So, anyway, catch my breath. So, Robin, do you have anything that you want to add to that? I'm sure.
No, we can go ahead and go into the meditation, because that's what helps a lot of times the most, is going into the Reiki energy. I think that it's funny, as I was listening, and I don't really want to add too much just because I thought it was all, I want to have time to go into the thing, but it is also the idea of the inner authority, and also the listening, and also the, do I need to speak up here or do I not? It's like that. It's always, that's an interesting piece of all of it too. And that's also gets to be my own choice of my own inner authority versus the outer authority. So, yeah. So, yeah, I think we should go into the journey. For those of you that are here, or the meditation, for those of you that are here or listening later, we are actually teaching a Reiki 1 and 2 class this weekend, and there's still a couple of spots left. I'm teaching with Colleen. And so if you're listening on Thursday, we'll probably have a spot or two left if you would like to join us. Colleen, you are also teaching Reiki Master Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of next week, correct? Yep.
Yeah.
So that is, let me just make sure I have the dates, the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th. As most of you know, the energy has been really intense over the last few weeks, and we have a really big, amazing energy conjunction thing going on this weekend. So it is a really great time to take a Reiki class, because a lot of times that is what can really help sort through it all, bring back in that energy that I know many of us have been lacking over the last few weeks. And then we also are teaching an animal Reiki class in the end of April, beginning of May. So, May 1st and 2nd is Animal Reiki 1 and 2, and the 3rd, 4th, and 5th is Animal Reiki Master. And then also we have our podcast Q&A next week on the 24th. It's a little bit later this month. So just to know what Colleen and I are up to over the next few weeks, we would love to have you join us. Right? No, it's not just you. It's intense right now. And we're all exhausted. Everyone's exhausted. So it's like walking through mud. I don't know if I've ever been more excited for Taurus season, which I don't say that usually. I love you, Tauruses, but it's always a harder energy for me because of my own personal chart. And we're very excited for it all to shift out. So, all right.